Okay, I'm going to start the webinar now, everybody. Thank you. I'm just going to give a couple of minutes for people to come in before we get started. Okay, before we get started, I just want to make sure everybody's aware of how to have the screen so that you can see our panel members as well as the presentation. In the top right hand of your screen, you should have an icon that says View. If you click onto that, you should have the option to use side-by-side gallery. That will work to enable you to see all the panelists as well as the presentation once we get started. Can I also ask everybody to note that the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to you all after today. Thank you very much. Jim, I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much indeed, Sue, and welcome to this webinar. This concerns the new forthcoming tax conditionality requirements in relation to hackney carriage and private hire licenses and also scrap metal dealers licenses. The Institute is delighted to be hosting this in partnership with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, usually known as HMRC, the British Metals Recycling Association, the National Private Hire and Taxi Association, the Licensed Private Hire Car Association, and in addition, we're also joined by Gary Jacobs from Eazitax, who is an accountant and tax consultant. You've already heard from Sue. Sue is our executive officer at the Institute, and she is controlling all the technical aspects of this. Now, what I'm going to do in a moment or two is ask everybody to introduce themselves. They've all the panelists. But before I do, I'll just introduce myself and then explain how we're going to work the next couple of hours. I'm James Button, or Jim Button. I'm a solicitor by profession, and I am very proud to say that I'm the president of the Institute of Licensing. The Institute is the professional body for licensing practitioners across the UK, and it represents local authorities, police officers, private practice practitioners, industry practitioners, and, of course, licensees. We operate on a national and regional level, and we have 12 regions across the UK. And our areas of interest include all the public regulatory licensing regimes: hackney carriage and private hire licensing, scrap metal licensing, street trading, sex establishment licensing, alcohol and entertainment licensing, gambling licensing, and so on. Now, after the introductions, HMRC are going to provide a short presentation, which is going to explain the new processes. And then after that, I'm going to ask each of the other parties to explain what their industry's concerns are about the practical implications of the new system and whether they feel that there are any misunderstandings within their particular industry. Then there'll be the opportunity for you as the delegates to ask questions. Now, these should be typed into the question box. There's a question box available. If you go to the bottom of the screen, there's a little tab marked Q&A, and that brings up a question box. And don't worry, because I'll go through this again before we start the questions. And then I'll read the question out and pose it to the appropriate person. Now, we will do our best to get through all the questions that have been asked, but as we've got over 600 people registered and over 400 people currently in the meeting, you realise that may prove impossible. What we're hoping is that even if your question isn't specifically answered, there'll be the information that you want provided as an answer to one of the other questions. Now, one thing I must make clear is that this is not a discussion on the merits or otherwise of this new requirement, or in other words, whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. Neither is it going to consider when, if, or how it may be extended or evaluated. This commences in April next year, and this afternoon is the opportunity to ask HMRC questions about it and to hear from the industry bodies. Right, in that case, I'm going to ask each of the presenters to just introduce themselves, and I'll start off with Sue Riley.
Hello, good afternoon, just coming off mute. Thank you, my name is Sue Riley and I work in HMRC. I am shortly going to be introduced to my colleagues. I'm part of the policy team who have helped to introduce this legislation, and I also have particular responsibility for working with digital colleagues who are developing the digital service that will enable people to do the tax checks. Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Jamie Horton.
Thank you, James. Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Horton from HMRC. I'm an assistant director working on policy and strategy. So we work on a range of policy measures, including this one, with a compliance focus.
Great, thank you very much. Cathy Smith.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's good to be with you this afternoon. I'm Cathy Smith. I'm part of the same team that Jamie and Sue are in, working on introducing conditionality. My particular focus recently has been on developing the legislation for it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Luke Jones.
Hi there, I'm Luke Jones. I also work in the same team as Cathy, Sue and Jamie, and helping to develop this policy.
Super. David Lawrie.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Lawrie. I'm the director of the National Private Hire and Taxi Association. We represent private hire drivers, private hire operators, hackney carriage drivers, and local trade associations around the country. And we're members of the Institute of Licensing as well. And we've been working very closely with HMRC on this.
Splendid, thank you. Steve Wright.
Hi, James and everybody. I'm Steve Wright, Chair of the Licensed Private Hire Car Association, and we are a national trade body that predominantly works with operators, but of course the operators work indirectly with drivers. We have members across the country, and we've been very much involved in the discussions with the HMRC, and we have met up with them in Whitehall and taken Gary with us as an expert person in the matter. I'd just like to thank the Institute for putting this on today and for the Revenue for being here to help us.
That's great. Thank you very much. Antonia Gray.
Antonia Gray. I'm the Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the British Metals Recycling Association. We represent scrap metal dealers.
Fantastic. And then finally, Gary Jacobs.
Thank you, James. Keeping all the troublemakers to last, I see. My name's Gary Jacobs. I'm an accountant for a company called Eazitax. We've been servicing the private hire and taxi trade for 28 years now. We're an early adopter of the MTD pilot and worked with HMRC, well, still do work with the HMRC on that. As Steve very kindly said, we worked with the NPHTA and we were involved in the early days of the conditionality. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I look forward to hearing what everybody has to say today.
Right, that's splendid. Thank you very much. Just to let you know, if you've got any questions about the technicalities of the process as well, of the webinar, can you please put those in the question and answers as well, because then Sue will be able to see them and hopefully address the issues. So I think that's everything in terms of the introductions. I'd now like to ask Jamie to run through the presentation. So over to you, Jamie.
Thanks very much. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So thanks again to the IOL for hosting today and all the panellists who have joined us to talk about this new policy. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about the new tax checks, which Parliament passed in the most recent Finance Act, which was the Finance Act 2021. We're going to walk through some details of how the checks will work in practice, including screenshots from our digital prototype. I'll also talk about what steps HMRC is taking to prepare for the changes and what we think licensing bodies and license applicants need to do to prepare too. I think there's a good amount of time to pose questions, and as you'll have seen, I'm joined by a number of HMRC colleagues as well as the wider panel. So we'll do our very best to address any questions that you may have today. So I should also say we've also published on gov.uk some what we call preliminary guidance, as well as some fact sheets and other supporting materials to help stakeholders to prepare. That includes things like recommended changes to make to licensing forms to capture information required under the new checks. It also includes some comms messages actually that you may wish to share. Some of the rep groups in particular may wish to share with their own stakeholders. So we'll be posting links to those materials in the sidebar during the course of the discussion today. And see if we could move on to the next slide, please. Maybe taking a moment to catch up on my screen. Thanks very much. So just a bit of basic background about the new legislation. So these new tax rules apply to licensing, including private hire driver and operator licensing in England and Wales, as well as scrap metal licensing in England and Wales. They require applicants to complete a tax check prior to getting a license renewal. As mentioned, they come into effect from the 4th of April 2022. I should say there's a slightly different process depending on whether an applicant is applying for a relevant license for the first time or not. First-time applicants only need to confirm to the licensing body that they've read and understood some HMRC guidance about their tax obligations. Other applicants will need to complete the tax check. The bulk of what I'm going to talk about today relates to the tax checks themselves. I should also say we're currently building a new digital service that will enable applicants to complete the checks with an absolute emphasis on making this as quick and easy as possible. So that service is currently subject to user testing, and we'll hear a bit more about how the new service works shortly. I've said this before at some of the recent stakeholder events that we've attended, but I think it's quite important just to set out again what the policy does and doesn't do, just to address exactly those points. So in terms of what it does do, this is really about ensuring that people are on HMRC systems as they should be. It's intended to support the sectors and support people into the tax system at the right time. It helps to ensure a level playing field, and also we think supports wider licensing objectives. The scope of the tax check, importantly, is limited to ensuring people are properly registered for tax if they're an individual or company. That could be through income tax, self-assessment, or corporation tax. And the tax check itself doesn't go further than that. In terms of what the policy doesn't do, it doesn't impose extra requirements. For example, it won't ask people to show that they've reported income accurately or paid tax due. It's not an inquiry process. It's a simple piece of assurance that the compliant majority should find very easy to complete. It doesn't share any information whatsoever about a person's tax affairs with licensing bodies. That's important. Applicants' details will remain confidential between them and HMRC. The only information that HMRC will disclose to the licensing body will be confirmation that an applicant has completed the tax check alongside some basic identifying information. So in all of this, there's an emphasis on simplicity. The aim is to ensure that the check is as quick and easy to complete as possible. The applicant, as I say, will input the information through the new portal that we're building, and that will enable them to confirm that they've completed the tax check. The confirmation of completion of the tax check needs to be gathered by the licensing body at the same time as the normal preliminary checks that licensing bodies carry out before issuing licenses. And it needs to be done before a licensing body reaches a decision on the license. So that will require some changes to, we think, the administration that licensing bodies carry out before they issue licenses. But we have worked to ensure that those changes will be minimal and the checks won't be lengthy to carry out. So in terms of background, we've consulted publicly twice on the measure and worked closely with stakeholder groups, including a number of those represented today, and licensing body representatives in getting to this stage. So Sue, if we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So over the next few slides, I'm going to run through some screenshots which show how the tax checks will work in practice. To demonstrate this, we'll look at a typical user journey for an applicant who is in self-assessment. The journey for companies will be similar, but the wording of questions will be slightly different, but the broad process will be the same. So the service itself will be hosted on gov.uk alongside wider information that's available for licensed applicants. The questions will be multiple choice and won't require anyone to input figures or other detailed tax information. The intention really is that the check should be completed within a handful of minutes, and we're aiming to get the phrasing of the questions and the user interface as simple and as clear as possible. So what you can see in front of you here is the first bit that you'll see when going into the tax check. You'll see once you come onto gov.uk and come through the government gateway. As you can see, the first question simply asks applicants to confirm the type of license they're applying for. I think we can probably move on to the next slide, please, Sue. Thank you. So the next two questions ask for some further information about the license that's being applied for. These are aimed to capture some information about the length of time that a person has held a license. And the purpose of these is to enable us to evaluate the effectiveness of the policy. Because this is a new approach, it's very important that we can start gathering information from day one to understand how effective it is in supporting compliance and supporting licensing objectives. So these questions really will help us to build that overall analytical picture. I'll just pause for a moment while you all absorb the detail that's in front of you. So the next two questions then are the tax-related questions. The first question that you can see there asks applicants to confirm their tax status. This allows for the fact that they may not need to be in self-assessment at all, actually. For example, they may be carrying out licensed activity as an employee, or they may be holding the license but not using it to generate any income. So, and these are of course perfectly valid reasons why a person might not be registered for tax. So it's important to ensure applicants can choose that route if they need to. This allows them to make that declaration without having to go through the full route of registering for tax. The second question that you can see there before you is a declaration to show that income from the licensed activity has been included on the tax return. You can see it's just a simple yes/no confirmation. Okay. I think we can probably move on to thanks. So the next screen enables the applicant to check their answers. And when the user progresses through this bit, there's some background checks which happen in real time to confirm that user details have been verified. Okay, the next screen then, if we could just move on, please, Sue, shows that the tax check is complete. So it's 5 multiple choice questions in total, and 2 of which relate to tax. So that emphasis on simplicity runs throughout the design of the service. And the code that you can see is important because the applicant needs to enter this on their license application form, and that enables the licensing body to confirm that the check is complete. Should say the code stays valid for 120 days. So that means it can be used by an applicant for multiple license applications as many times as they want within that period. And that's particularly relevant for those larger businesses who may need to submit more than one application in a given period. And that's it. That's the tax check that the applicant will need to go through. If we could just move on to the next slide, please, Sue. And this one gives a bit more detail about who needs to complete the new tax checks. You'll see it applies to individuals, companies and partnerships. And as I mentioned earlier, these checks don't actually apply to first-time licence applications. And this reflects that in many cases, licence applicants won't need to register for tax when they apply for the first time, and those requirements may kick in a little bit later. So it avoids imposing any kind of barrier for entrance into the sector, new entrance into the sector. I know that's particularly important at the moment. And as I say, these checks apply to licence renewals, and that's people who have held the same. That also includes people who have held the same type of licence in the 12 months before the application date. Those people will also need to do the tax check, and effectively that's people who have had only a short break in their licensed activity before coming and applying for the next licence. So I think we can move on to the next slide, please, Sue. Okay, so although the digital route to complete the service is quick and simple, we recognise that not everyone in the sectors is able to engage digitally. HMRC already has good provision of support for people who face specific accessibility barriers, including barriers to digital engagement. Telephone support will be available for applicants who can't use a digital service, and the process and questions asked will be much the same or very similar to the digital route. So that additional support will be available for those who need it. Of course, to complete the tax check, the applicant only needs to verify that they are appropriately registered for tax if they need to be, and anyone who needs to register will be able to contact HMRC for further support. And of course, anyone who needs help with any other aspect of their tax affairs linked to the tax check will be able to get that support from HMRC or indeed their agent or advisor. I think we can move on to the next slide, please, Sue. So next, I think it's worth walking through the process that licensing bodies will follow once the applicant has completed the tax check. There'll be a separate but linked service that licensing bodies will be able to access, and this has 4 pieces of information that need to be provided. Now this, as I say, this needs to be done before the licensing body makes a decision on whether or not to issue the license. So if we could just move on to the next slide, please, sir. So the first piece of information that needs to be provided is the all-important tax check code, followed by the type of license that's being applied for. That's all fairly straightforward. So if we could just move on to the next slide, please, Sue. And the next 2 questions ask for some basic confirmatory details about the applicant. These questions will be slightly different if the applicant is a company, but for the purposes of today, we're looking at the individual's journey. So once those details have been inputted, the service progresses on to the next stage. So if we could just move on to the next slide, please. So the service there confirms that the tax check code is valid, and you'll see there that the information that's shared back with the licensing body is really very limited. There's no tax related information whatsoever that's shared with the licensing body. It's just a simple confirmation that the check is complete. Okay, so I'm now going to talk a bit about what applicants and licensing bodies can do to prepare for the changes, as well as what HMRC is doing to prepare. Just move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So for applicants, we'd recommend signing up for HMRC online services. Applicants will need a government gateway user ID and password to access the tax check service. As the slides say, if you don't have a user ID, you can create one by registering for HMRC online services. And it's also a good idea to check your records are up to date with HMRC. So for example, address details, if they're listed incorrectly, it'd be a good idea to get those updated just to make sure that the check can progress smoothly. So on to the next slide, please. So for licensing bodies, we expect that the easiest way to implement the changes will be to update licensing systems and forms to include a new field to capture the information that's required to get confirmation that the tax check has been completed. For first-time applicants, it will involve taking a declaration that the applicant is aware of their key tax obligations and providing a link to relevant guidance on tax obligations, which is available on gov.uk. For everyone else, it will involve taking the 9-character tax check code. So our preparatory guidance, which is now available on gov.uk, does include some suggested wording that licensing bodies can use when updating forms. The changes, as I say, for licensing bodies are intended to be minimal, limited to a couple of additional declarations that should be taken, as well as the collection of the 9-character tax check code and the company number, if the applicant is a company. Again, I'd recommend looking at our preparatory guidance on that one, because it sets out exactly what changes licensing bodies need to make. Okay, so on to slide 17, please. So finally then, in terms of what HMRC is doing to prepare, as part of the work to build the service, we've been carrying out fairly extensive user research and testing with licensees, licensing bodies, and others, including tax agents. So we'll be continuing to develop the service in line with user feedback, with the aim of making it as accessible and easy to use as possible. As mentioned earlier, we've published guidance on how to prepare for the changes, so we'll make sure those links are posted in the sidebar for you. And from January, we'll be entering the private beta phase of the service, with testing of the service done in close collaboration with 3 licensing bodies of varying size. And I should also say that we're continuing to shape our communications plans around all this, building up the comms that we're putting out via stakeholder groups and licensing bodies. So it would be also good to gather any feedback that you might have during the course of the day or thereafter on how best to get the messaging out to the user base. So on to the final slide, please. So I hope that gives an overview of what the tax check entails. Just briefly before I finish, I said earlier that we'd already consulted twice on the measure, on the policy around the tax check. For completeness, I'll just briefly mention that today we've launched a 4-week technical consultation on a short set of regulations, so secondary legislation, and they deal with the administrative details that weren't contained in the Finance Act legislation, and that includes things like how certain actions must be carried out and when certain actions are deemed to have taken place. So the Finance Act and the regulations together will provide the full legal framework that supports the policy. The purpose of this consultation is just to make sure that the regulations work as intended. So we'll be writing out to stakeholder bodies to tell them where to get hold of the draft regulations and how to comment on them should they wish to do so. So that's, I think that's everything that I wanted to say for the presentation. So I will end there and hand over to the panellists for their remarks, or back to the chair rather. Thanks.
Jamie, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. Extremely interesting. I have to say it's already generated a number of questions, which we'll get to in due course. So now I'm just going to ask the industry reps to just give us their take on this, what their industry's concerns are, and what misunderstandings they think may already exist within that industry. So I'm going to ask Antonia to go first.
Great, thank you very much. I would say straight away that BMRA has been involved with this since it was first mooted. We raised various concerns. There is still the concern about the issues that we have many operators that have multi-sites, and generally it will be the site operator, the depot manager, that will be applying for the licence. Being able to access corporate tax records could prove difficult. So there is concern of how that will roll out. The second concern is local authorities updating their forms in time. It was not long to go. We run a 3-year cycle, so for a lot of it, it's coming due soon. We're concerned about that. We're also concerned. I know, James, you didn't want us to talk about the negatives. We are concerned that this could lead to a lot of site not relicensing with a scrap metal dealer's licence. We are concerned that there will not be checks undertaken by local authorities or perhaps HMRC to look at why these sites have suddenly dropped off licensing. I don't think that that's been prepared for. It certainly doesn't happen now, and I don't think it will happen after the implementation of this tax check. In general, it's not onerous. I think for anyone that has a gateway, there's not a deal with that. But I would definitely say that the three concerns I've raised are being talked about. I think that's it from me.
Okay, Antonia, that's super. David, would you like to do the same, please?
Yeah, by all means. Thank you, Jim. The main concerns that we see from our members and from the forums nationally is a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of misconception. A lot of drivers saying it will let the councils know what your income and expenditure is. It will scare a lot of drivers off that aren't registered for tax, and we get all sorts of comments coming through. So I'm pleased to see that it has been made simple. It is a quick, simple process to do. It's easy to understand. I'm also happy to see that measures have been put in place for those that are not internet savvy, so there is a helpline for them. It's been made so easy to access for drivers. But what I'd like to see is this is an excellent opportunity to bridge the gap between licensees and licensors. And I think that we need to be open, we need to be frank, we need to be reassuring, and we need to be honest. And we need to reassure applicants that you're going to get a unique reference code in much the same way as you do with the DBS. That's all that you're going to be giving to the council, and the councils will not have access to your confidential financial records. That's between the taxpayer or the registered tax person and HMRC. And I think this is an ideal opportunity to bridge that gap and to have that mutual understanding.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Steve, your chance.
Yeah, thanks very much, James. The industry currently is going through unprecedented turmoil after the pandemic, catastrophic driver shortage. And during the pandemic, there was a variety of performance levels from licensing authorities about managing licensing and the necessary things that are, to keep the system going. We've still got some licensing authorities that are not processing licenses. Now, we would like to see, given the time and the lead time, that licensing authorities are really up to speed with this, and that they are absolutely on the case in April to be able to do it, because any further delays to the industry would just exacerbate problems that already exist. Now, to be fair to licensing authorities, we understand, like everybody else, the impact of the pandemic, but there is a real opportunity to get systems online and to get systems sharpened up to be ready for this. So we're hoping that this will be a good opportunity for those that have yet to do it, to get their systems in place to work online at licensing authority level. That will no doubt filter through to ease of registration, etc., for operators, and in turn down to drivers. So that's our hopes and fears. We've supported this. Like yourself, I gave evidence to the House of Lords, and we think it's a very sensible, pragmatic thing to be doing. So it's just those fears in the back of our mind. Let's not have any log jams at the licensing authority end. Could they kindly get up to speed and really help the industry thrive and go forward? Thank you.
Great. I'm sure that's been heard by a lot of the local authority people on this webinar. And then finally, Gary, a slightly different perspective, but off you go.
Okay. Well, I mean, I have to echo some of the things that Steve and Dave have said, but from my perspective, I think it's the implications of the operators. It's what they think is going to happen as to what's actually going to happen. I don't think anybody can argue that a level playing field tax-wise for everybody is a bad thing. I think it's perfectly reasonable. Really what the operators are looking at now, post-Brexit, post-COVID and everything else is, as Steve mentioned, there are some horrific labour shortages. So what the operators want to know is if this process is going to lose me drivers. It's a very real, boots on the ground, hands-on thing, and they want to know what the implications are going to be from them. I mean, some of the misunderstandings that I've dealt with, and we talk a lot with our clients and with people in the industry about it, operators want to know if they are going to be liable for the behaviour of their drivers. One of the other sides and the things that I get involved with is the workers' rights and the relationship of operators to their drivers. And a lot of people are seeing this is what's the benefit for the operator. Not that there should be a benefit of this piece of law that's brought around, but what's going to be the benefit of ensuring that? Is it going to be too complicated? Well, we've seen a very simple system here today, and it is just 5 questions. The question that I want to know is what's the implication of the answers to those questions? And I'll explain that a little bit more in a second. A lot of operators at the moment already take drivers' UTR. So a lot of people are saying to me, we already take their unique tax reference number, their 10-digit number. Why can't we just carry on doing this? Now, I understand that, and I was there for the early days when we were talking about it, that we need a form of self-declaration as opposed to just the collection of a number, and that's a good thing. But I don't think enough people know about it yet, and we have a lot of people here today, and it's fantastic that so many people are online with this, but I think we need to push some major information out to operators and drivers about the reality of what this is. You spoke before about the compliant majority, but we're the guys that are going to have to deal with the uncompliant minority. And I think it's important to understand what's going to happen, because the first thing that people are going to be asked to do is to declare when, and by the way, the law's, on our side, this is righteous, but in terms of maintaining the labour supply, when somebody fills out the form and says they're not registered and how long have you not been registered, how's it going? And this is something I've fielded from a lot of people. What's going to happen to those people? And I think one of the problems that we're going to have in terms of its implementation is the fear of the drivers. If I'm not registered, I do want to be registered, I meant to, whatever the reasons behind it, am I going to debtor's prison? And I think that we need to disseminate the behaviour and give some assurances to ensure that people comply and that we don't lose drivers for operators. So I've kind of gone into the boots on the ground detail, but I think that's what I'm going to be dealing with over the next couple of years.
No, certainly, Gary, that's absolutely fine. Right, we're now going to move on to the questions and answers. We've already got a load in the questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through them in the order that they were asked. Some of them, if they've been answered already, I'll skip them. So from the point of view of everybody on the webinar, please keep putting them in, and we'll see how it goes. So the first one is from Grace Dowson, and this one I think is for you, Jamie. On step 1, can they tick more than one? For example, if they're a driver and an operator, or I guess if they're a driver and a scrap metal dealer as well.
I'll just ask one of my colleagues. Sue, would you be able to have a look at that particular question? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. It's one tax check per license type. So if you're a taxi or PHV driver, you would, or both, you would tick that particular button and you would do the tax check for that license type. If you're also an operator and you need to do the tax check for that, then you would do a separate check. Hope that answers the question.
Yep, that sounds fine. Moving on, from Russell Williams, he actually says it's a question for you, Jamie. This year's DFT stats show that there are 343,800 licensed drivers. I don't think you necessarily need to remember the figures. It's disappeared. Where's it gone? Something's happened. Help. Here we go. And 15,100 licensed private hire operators. Do HMRC have any stats on how many licensed drivers and operators are currently registered for tax purposes?
So just to address that question, so we publish general statistics on the overall tax gap. We don't break that down by sector. We have, of course, looked at a range of different factors in determining kind of why the initial approach for conditionality here is applying to these sectors, and that includes, areas where we think there's a vulnerability to the hidden economy, but also kind of areas where there's compatibility with the licensing arrangements, and we think actually, some form of tax check could complement and support the licensing objective. So that just kind of addresses the general point of kind of where we see why we see these areas as suitable for the tax check. In terms of specific numbers or volumetrics around people who need to come forward and register, we don't think it would be all that helpful to publish estimates at this stage. I think suffice to say, we think it would be a minority, and that the large majority within these sectors are reporting and paying the taxes due. But nonetheless, there's definitely merit in supporting that level playing field by introducing just this sort of light touch arrangements to encourage those who do need to come forward to register to do so. So I'm sorry I can't give a specific figure to that particular question, but in terms of a bit of background about our thinking around that, that's kind of where we are.
Okay, that's fine. Next one from Tina Anderson. Do all applicants need a government gateway login to input their information? I think that's been answered, but you may just want to reinforce it.
Shall I take this one, Jim?
Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, the answer is yes, all applicants will need to log on to a government gateway account to complete the tax check.
Okay, thank you. Alan Lean says, what about a proprietor of a vehicle who's neither a licensed driver nor an operator? Well, I think that the answer is it just doesn't count for them at the moment, does it? Sue, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, that's quite right. Right answer.
Okay.
That license is not within scope.
Okay, that's fine. Right. Okay, Jonathan Yeomans says, we have some users who've been waiting 6 months for a tax registration to be processed by HMRC. Will there be a fast-track process for late registrations in these sectors to be processed quickly before April 2022 to avoid anyone not registered having to go a long time without being able to trade if they need to renew a license? Who's going to go? I can see Jamie about to prod his camera, so I suspect you volunteered, Jamie.
So just on the specific question of a fast track, well, that's not something that we're looking at for this particular policy. I suppose we'd be interested to gather any feedback that Jonathan might have about the experience of his customers and colleagues around that, just so that we can sort of register that. I think probably there is a bit of an emphasis on making sure that people are aware that the changes are coming, and in good time ahead of coming up to do the tax check to confirm that they are registered if they need to be. We don't think the registration periods are sufficient to kind of cause anyone to have major concerns, given that the length of time that other checks around the license take. There will also be a telephone process as well that people can use to contact HMRC if they need to notify chargeability and get the code for the tax check, which could help if anyone's facing particular time constraints around the need to renew. But yeah, I'd be interested in sort of gathering any further feedback if anyone on the call wants to get in touch with us on that particular point.
Okay, that's great. Gary, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I don't really recognise the time period, to be honest. It doesn't. Maybe I've missed something, but it really doesn't take a great deal of time to get somebody registered. There is a direct line with HMRC, and of course, if you walk into an accountant's door, by the time you've signed a bit of paper, you've got your proof of registration. So it kind of takes 20 minutes. Even if the process may take longer, you're immediately covered because your tax agent will cover it. So maybe I've misunderstood, but I don't. Unless somebody from the HMRC can tell me there's something, I'm living in an island of beauty and peace, but it really doesn't take that long to register.
Okay, that's great. So moving on, Kate Lewis says, is it up to the licensing team to know that they, I assume they mean the applicant, are on the correct tax code?
Shall I take that one? I think it's probably about my turn.
Please, Cathy.
The licensing team don't need to know anything about the applicant's tax affairs at all. You can leave all of that to HMRC. All you need to do is to get confirmation from us that the person has done a tax check. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Can I just make the point? Sorry, James. And once again, just to bring people to it, when you go onto the HMRC website, it's a declaration that you're making. So you're not, as I mentioned before, a lot of operators get people's UTRs, or this is a declaration. So they're asking you to just make the confirmation. They're not asking for detail. I don't want to be seen to overly support HMRC, but it's a simple declaration they're asking you for. I'm only joking.
It's that you exist, isn't it? Not that how you exist.
Yeah, you exist within the tax environment. That's, and that's really what they're asking for.
Okay. Charlotte Lindop says, will there be an API? I suspect that might have been meant to be app to do this automatically that can connect into our system and then go away and check the code against the HMRC website.
It's
I think that's one for me.
API, Jim.
Sorry?
API.
It is an API.
It is an API, is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think that's one for me.
Go on then, Sue.
Yeah, I'll forget answering that. The short answer is no. The development of an API is not within the scope of this particular IT development. And that's basically because user research hasn't identified a need for it, because don't forget, the majority of the questions, as Jamie demonstrated, are to do with the license. There's only 2 questions that relate to tax. So it's not felt that an API is necessary really, because you're just saying, yes, I'm registered for tax if I need to be. And yes, I'm telling you about it. I'm declaring the income from my licensed activity. So for those reasons, an API wasn't deemed necessary. Now, if the situation changes, then obviously we would look again at the scope.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. From Valens Jacobs, is the tax code going to be case sensitive? I think that's one for Jamie, is it?
Shall I take this one?
Yeah, please, Luke. Well volunteered.
Short answer is no. So it should work if they put it in uppercase or lowercase.
Super. Thank you.
I would add to that, we've developed it specifically. We've listened to feedback from licensing officers that says, please don't make it case sensitive. So we haven't. Okay,
that's good. Right. Ross Hill asks, how will the system know that the registered tax entity and the license applicant are one and the same? Could somebody put a tax check number in for company A and then apply for a license in company B's name, and the local authority portal would not indicate the mismatch? Anybody want to go for that one?
So I think it just comes down to the information that is shared back with the licensing authority, which does include some a minimum level of information to confirm that the applicant matches the person who has completed the tax check. And of course, the tax check will require someone to go through the government gateway, which is an identification process too. So I think we should be okay on that particular one. I'll pause in case any HMRC colleagues want to say more or correct me if I've misconstrued any of that.
Yeah. It's just I suppose it's just to reiterate that when the licensing body goes to do their end of the tax check, get the verification that it's been completed, the system will ask them for some identifying information, and that obviously needs to match the entity that is applying for the license. Otherwise, it won't. Otherwise, you'll get a mismatch, as you're saying. It won't confirm that the tax check has been completed.
Okay, righto. Right, Simon Gallagher. If an operator license is held by more than one individual, so as a partnership, which option do they select? Who wants to go for that one?
I think that's one for me. So if you are in a partnership, then you will be accounting for your tax as a member of that partnership. So in other words, as an individual, you'll have a collection of individuals who come together to form a partnership, or you might have companies in a partnership, or perhaps a mix of the two. But whichever you are as a partner, so for example, I as Cathy Smith would be an individual, I would do the tax check as an individual.
Yeah, I suspect the question is, if the license is held in the name of Blogs Cars as an operator's license, and Blogs Cars consists of me and you, which person is actually going to put their information in, or do they both have to?
That is going to depend on what the licensing body's own practices are. So where the licensing body has more than one person who holds the license, then if the licensing body is content for one of them to fill out the application on behalf of the partnership, then it's that one person who's completed the application who would need to do the tax check. if the licensing body requires all of them to be parties to the application, then each of those people would need to do their own tax checks. So if there's 6 partners, the licensing body would need to have confirmation of completion of a tax check for all 6.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I was just going to say that to confirm what Cathy was saying there, it would depend on the person that is applying for the license, because it would be that named person or group of named people that would need to satisfy the conditionality check.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Dave. Right. What happens if a tax code supplied is incorrect? I assume no, this is from Lee Morgan. I assume no valid check, no license issued.
Correct.
So,
yeah, correct.
Yeah,
you have to obtain a valid, if you're a licensing officer, you have to obtain a valid tax check code.
Yeah, it's a don't pass go, don't collect £200 situation, isn't it? Absolutely. Okay. Right, Trevor Ford. We're incorporating the form changes ready as per the preparatory guidance, but when will the link to the tax check for licensees be published? Our authority posts some renewal forms out 3 months in advance of the renewal date. So to avoid implementation issues, this information ideally needs to be provided before the planned January guidance. Right, that's which of you is going to step up for that one?
I'm happy to step up for that one, but could you just run that one past me again, please? Sorry.
Yeah, I think what they're saying is that they send out renewal forms up to 3 months in advance. So 3 months in advance would be early January. Can that guidance be ready for them so that they don't have any issues about people who actually want to renew immediately rather than on the absolute last day?
Yeah, it'll all be available in January with all the necessary links to the guidance and to the system. So that'll all be there so that you can update your forms or your digital systems, whatever it is. The link to everything will be live in January.
Okay, do you know when?
And that is 3 months ahead of the digital service and the requirement to do the tax check. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Right, moving on. Ross Hill, will there be any annual reporting requirements for licensing authorities?
I can take that one. No, we're not putting in place those kind of requirements. We are going to be evaluating the effectiveness of the measure, of course, but that will be done by HMRC, potentially with some collaboration from licensing bodies, but no formal reporting requirements or anything like that.
Okay. Next one, Rachel Andrew. How long does the code generated by the driver stay valid for?
I'll take that one, Jim. That's there's 120 days.
120 days. Okay, that's a good length of time. Tony Ireland, Finance Act 21 consequential amendments. I may have missed something. I can see the amendments at Schedule 33 of the Finance Act at paragraph 11 for Section 17 of the Transport Act 1985, and then for the Scrap Metal Dealers Act 2013, but I don't see an equivalent amendment for the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 1976.
That one's for me. You'll notice my colleagues all rushing to dive in front of me, but that one's definitely for me. The gentleman is correct. The Q&A has disappeared from my screen because I clicked the unmute, so I can't see it anymore. But the gentleman is correct that in terms of taxi and private hire licensing, we've focused specifically on the Transport Act. That's because from conversations with colleagues in DFT and their lawyers and our lawyers, we came to the conclusion that it was only the Transport Act that needed to be amended. Therefore, we haven't made any other amendment elsewhere in licensing legislation because it wasn't required.
Okay. Righto. Thank you very much. Nadeem Ahmed, what is the purpose of this new procedure in simple words? I missed the first few minutes of the webinar, so it may be mentioned then. Can I suggest for that one that you wait and then go back through the recording? I think that's going to be the easiest way to answer that, because otherwise we're going to be starting from scratch again, Nadeem. So I hope that's all right. Moving on then, Austin Young. If a driver has incorrectly made a gateway account as a company, and we carry out a check on them as an individual, will this result in the check failing?
Can I just put something in there?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so we deal a lot with personal tax accounts, and this obviously because we're involved with making tax digital. But somebody from HMRC just like to make a comment, because I think we still find, even though we've pushed all of our clients to open personal and business tax accounts, and we've been dealing with them for ages, I still think that people don't know about them. So does anybody want to comment on because in the future, as we digitise the process, the personal tax accounts will be the main place where people can find information, both the personal and business tax account. But does anybody want to comment about what they are so that people have a greater understanding?
So in terms of just to comment on people not having sufficient understanding of what the PTA and BTA is. So this is, I think what might be easiest actually is if we just dig out the comprehensive guidance and links to the PTA and BTA, so everyone can see exactly what you can do through those services. They are indeed very useful, and you can make a number of different types of transaction and things like that. So probably easiest if we do it that way, just to make sure everyone's clear. And yeah, it's an interesting point around people not what you say about people not fully being aware of the service. I think. Yeah, we'll take that one away if that's okay.
I mean, we've obviously part of the MTD process. Everything's based on that, but I still find, and other accountants are just as bad. They don't know. Everybody should have a personal tax account, and if you've got a business, open a business tax account. But yes, maybe we'll put a link.
Yeah, sure. And it's probably worth saying that this particular service is not integrated or directly part of the PTA or BTA. It's effectively a standalone service, and it kind of comes down to the simplicity of it. Just those few clicks that you need to make. But that's the position at the moment.
Okay, that's great. Nadeem Ahmed again. If the council won't know about income and tax figures, then what's the purpose of the new procedure? Anybody want to answer that one?
So it gives everyone, I suppose, that assurance that person's been through the tax check, and they'll know kind of what it entails and what steps people need to take to do it. But I think when we consulted on this, I think most local authorities and licensing bodies and stakeholder groups and customers we spoke to were very clear that they didn't want to have a situation where licensing bodies were getting detailed information about a person's tax affairs or having to make licensing determinations, bearing in mind people's tax position. That didn't seem appropriate, and I can completely understand why. So what this does really, it's a fairly simple, fairly light touch piece of assurance that will confirm that a person's been through the tax check and that HMRC is satisfied that they have notified themselves to HMRC and aren't effectively hidden. So it gives that bit of assurance, and it strengthens the overall system.
Great, thank you.
Well, just a quick comment on the back of that. Just to understand it, the whole point of this process is to find the hidden. Once the hidden are found and declared, then HMRC's job is, and the accountant's job is to take it from there. But we have to find the hidden first, and I think everybody agrees that creates a fairer playing field. So I think what we've always got to concentrate on is the beauty and the simplicity of what conditionality is doing. It's creating a environment where people are declared, and then fights and arguments and all the rest of it can go further down the line. But that's the first stage to make a fairer tax society.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So I was just looking ahead at the next question. The next question is actually a comment from Helen Johnson. She says, seems straightforward, and like what we do for the DVLA code, this can easily be incorporated into our online application process, and we'll be advising applicants on the purpose of this check. Excellent. Okay. Imran Ibrahim says, My private hire badge expires in January 2022. Will this still be applicable, or will it be April 2022? If it's not a renewal before the 4th of April, this won't come into play, will it? Sorry, after the 4th of April.
That's correct. That's correct. I'm not entirely sure that I necessarily fully understood the question, but I think that perhaps what he's getting at is, does he have to do a tax check for January 22? And the answer would be no. The tax check applies to applications that are made on or after 4th of April 2022. So if you're renewing your license before that, you won't need to do a tax check that this time round. Obviously, in another 3 years' time or so, when you're renewing it again, hopefully at that point you wouldn't need to do a tax check. Hope that covered the question.
I think it does. Steve, you got your hand up.
Yeah, just say when we had our early discussions, I think in 2018 on this, we actually said that it would be a catastrophe if there was a cliff edge date, and it absolutely made sense for that reason to do a renewal. I think one of the questions that may need to be answered is different authorities have different lengths of renewals. I think it's generally about 3 years on private hire, but I would presume there's going to be a reasonable date for those that are not inside. I think it will be 3 years, but it is important that there is no cliff edge, and it was a very good question.
Okay. Right. One from Lara Clare. Will HMRC be notifying the taxi trade and the scrap metal trades of their obligations, or will that be left to local authorities?
Sorry, I'll come in there. So I think we'd like to work in partnership with local authorities, actually. So we're doing quite a bit of engagement with the sectors and the trade representative bodies, and we'll be putting out some trade articles. We've already done some of that. We'll be doing more of that. So I think we definitely see it as our role to be getting the message out as far and wide as possible amongst the user base. But I think we're also conscious that the licensing authorities have, really excellent links in through the channels that they have with the user base, and we'd like to sort of work with you all to get those messages out. So one of the things that we've done is we've published a communications toolkit, which includes a number of pieces of collateral, so things like suggested social media content and suggested messaging and a fact sheet. So those kind of resources, I think, could be quite usefully deployed by licensing authorities and some of the other stakeholders involved to make sure that we get these messages out as far and wide. So yeah, in summary, I think we see it as our role to get the messages out, but we'd certainly like to work in partnership with you all to do the same.
Great. Okay, thank you. Sorry, it's just shot down to the bottom because we've got a new question in. Comment from Lorraine Simpson. In St Helens, we've already written to our licensed trades to advise them of the new arrangements and requirements. We've signposted them to all available information. That's great. Clive Stevenson, we have a start date of 4th April 2022. Yep. Would licensing authorities have to check all current drivers at that date, or do we await their next renewal of a license? I think it's renewal. I think that's...
You're absolutely right. The tax check focuses on the application. Once the application has been decided and the license has been granted, there's no question of going back and overturning potentially the decision that was made about the application. So the tax check is always positioned before a decision on the application is made.
Okay. Robert Smith, is there a simple guide to this which authorities can pass on to the trade in their areas? I think the answer is there is, isn't there? But over to you.
So yeah, that would be the fact sheet that Jamie just mentioned as part of the comms toolkit, and yeah, you can use that to pass on to your licensees. Yep,
excellent. Okay, Charlotte Lindop, is the 1976 Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act going to be updated with the right to refuse or revoke a license if they're not registered for tax, like it was following the Immigration Act changes?
It's not HMRC's plan to do that. That's the answer. No.
Yeah, this is a pre-application requirement, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Lucy Maxwell, step 1 of the application form. Could the first point read applicants for taxis and stroke or private hire vehicles to avoid calls from people stating they don't hold both licenses? Thank you. That seems like a very sensible, easy change.
Is that the first question on the tax check? Was that the first?
I think
screen?
it must be yes.
Yeah, I think that's fine. We do sort of update questions based on the user testing and what people understand. So absolutely, we can keep looking at the phrasing of those questions.
Yep, that sounds good. Thank you. Nikki Riddle. So I was just trying to read it, see if it's one we need to ask. Will we always get a tax check as a valid message? And if we don't, then what do we do? Oh, so we always get a tax check is valid message. And if we don't, then what do we do?
I can take that one. No, you won't. So if the tax check code is out of date, you'll get a message to say tax check code not valid. If you've mistyped, you've got a typo in there, obviously it won't. Or if the code doesn't match the other information, the date of birth or the company reg number or the license type, if none of those things match, then they don't. And you get a couple of attempts to try to correct it because it could be a typo. But if it doesn't correct, then no, it means that the information you're trying to input is incorrect. And you probably need to go back to the licensee and say, please, can you give me a valid tax check code?
Yep. Okay. Clive Stevenson again. Legally, would this under the current legislation be a reasonable cause to refuse to renew or suspend a current license if a driver is not or doesn't register? Well, can I answer that? I mean, as far as I see this, if this is for renewals, you cannot renew if it doesn't come up positive. So it's not a question of taking action against a license. That license will expire, I think, but application to renew. So it won't be a valid application to renew, will it? So it's not a valid application to renew because the required steps have not been completed. That's how I see it. But Cathy, what would you like to add to that?
All I would say is that whether or not the tax check has been completed isn't part of the information that the licensing body is going to consider when it reaches its conclusion on whether to grant or refuse the license. Licensing bodies asked us very clearly not to make it part of that decision-making process. Therefore, it comes at the point before that. It effectively opens the door to considering that basket of evidence and making a decision, but it's not part of the basket of evidence that licensing bodies would consider at their request.
Yeah, and I think that answers the next one from Nathan Howson. Has there been any provision made for non-compliance? If we have applicants who haven't registered when they should have done, does the legislation bar the grant of a license, or will it be for local authorities to use their discretion to refuse and ultimately defend any appeals which arise? It doesn't get that far, does it? Okay.
Yeah, so it effectively bars them from being able to issue a new license, so their existing license will essentially expire if they don't go back and comply with that requirement.
Yep. Okay.
So that's why it's so important to get the word out. That's why it's so important that we make it so clear to everybody that's applying for license that this is going to be the key that opens the door. It's not going to be subject to debate afterwards. And I think that's what I mean. As a company, we're trying to do that within the private hire industry, and that's a big deal, and everybody here has got to take it on board. April is not a long way away, and we need to make sure that people know.
Yeah, and the HMRC system doesn't want all those 243,000 people doing it on the 1st of March, do they? I can well foresee that. Okay, that's answered that one. Right.
Sorry, Jim, I've got my hand up.
You're sorry, David. I didn't see that. Far away.
Yeah, I think There's a few questions on here that are of the same nature, and I think it's very important at this stage if somebody from HMRC can explain and reassure applicants that there is a safety measure in place. So, for example, if the council's access to the portal is down or the driver's access to the portal is down, and that can be verified that they have done all they can and they can't access the platform, there is a safety measure in place for that. If somebody could reinforce that and explain it from HMRC, please.
Yes, absolutely. Very happy to do that. You're absolutely right. We felt that it was important because of the fact that applicants were going to have to come to HMRC to do their tax check, and licensing bodies can only get confirmation that the tax check's been done by coming to HMRC. We felt it very important that if our system prevented them in any way from being able to do what we have said they have to do, that their situation should be safeguarded. So therefore, if either the licensing body attempts to get confirmation from us that the applicant has completed a tax check and they can't get that from us because our system is unavailable, or if the applicant is trying to do their tax check at the request of the licensing body and again is unable to do so because the system is unavailable, then the licensing body can go ahead and make their decision on the application in the absence of a tax check. And the licensing body does not have to go back to the applicant after they've made their decision on the application and say, well, okay, but we still need you to do your tax check. If HMRC's system was down, then we lose that ability to interact with the person until the next time they renew 3 years or so down the line. What I would say is that HMRC's system needs to be down for a period of time, and the period of time we've gone for is 5 days. So if it's down for 5 minutes, and unfortunately it was down at the time you tried to use it, I'm afraid that's not going to get you a free pass this time. It needs to be down for a period of time. We've gone for 5 days. We consulted on that period of time in summer last year, and so that's in the legislation at the moment. But you're absolutely right to have raised this. It's an important point, and thank you for doing so.
Yeah, so basically the message out there is if you are trying and you can't access it, take a screenshot, try again later. You're supposed to apply for renewal up to 4 weeks before your badge expires anyway. So a 5-day period is more than ample. And if you can't do it after you've tried consecutively for 5 days, then you've got 5 screenshots to verify that you have done what you're supposed to do and there's something wrong with the system. So I thought it was vital that message got out there. Thank you.
I would just add to that, if I can, Jim, that licensing bodies will be able to verify if the system's down because they'll be able to access the service availability pages, which will say on this day or from this period the system was down. Take a screenshot by all means, but licensing officers will be able to confirm that.
Okay. Yeah, I get that, but of course that depends on licensing authorities being able to access the platform. But it is reassuring to know that you will keep a record. That's
and
accessible.
I understand the belt and braces. I'd take a screenshot too. Yeah.
But I think the key message from that is that when this information is being disseminated, which we've all agreed is going to be as far and as wide as possible, the emphasis is, for heaven's sake, don't leave it till the last minute. Get this done as soon as possible. As Gary said, it's not a frightfully difficult process. And then once it's done, that's it. You've got it. Right. Okay. Jonathan Yeomans, thanks for the information today. We know of some taxi and private hire vehicle operators who are concerned they're outside of this process, but their income streams could start to be detrimentally impacted from April 22 if their self-employed drivers don't do what they should. Is there anything that taxi, private hire, scrap metal operators could and should be doing now to make sure their drivers are ready for these checks? Gary, do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, well, I'm trying not to be too commercial in this, but people like myself that service the trade, you can call us and we'll send you our conditionality kit. Actually, which is a thing, by the way, eazitax.co.uk. So, in all seriousness, the one of the problems that we have is the level of obligation that operators feel. They want to maintain their workforce, their self-employed workforce. They need their labour, but it's recognising from the operators that this is a positive thing, that the registration of drivers and the fair playing field. So we're back to the same thing: information, social media. I'm going to say this as an accountant. We're going out to all of our clients and all of the trade. We are offering free advice to drivers. We're doing tax surgeries. We've got posters and we've got a conditionality kit that goes out to operators, because let's be honest, the operator is the main contractor, is the access to the driver, and all we can do and ask. There are other accountants, so everybody should really be going out to just make it very clear. And I think, as I say, operators have been so badly hit through the pandemic, so badly hit through Brexit. We don't need to see from that perspective. We don't need to see any more labour shortages. So it's just about, we've given it our number one priority to make sure people know, but we're happy for people to join the fight. Steve Wright and I know Dave Lawrie are both massive proponents. I mean, they represent the industry of making sure that operators know and recognise this. So we've just got to keep on going and pushing. One of the things that I would ask as well is, from HMRC's viewpoint as well, is it is a simple message. It doesn't need to be overcomplicated. So let's maintain the simplicity of the message as well.
Okay, great. Kevin Davies said, would the online system have a Welsh language provision?
Yes.
Yes, excellent. Okay. Debbie Devine says, we already submit details for the NFI checks. Why can't HMRC have access to this? This is another check for licensing authorities to do when we already provide the information elsewhere. NFI check.
That's the fraud initiative, so National Fraud Initiative. So I guess the question is why, if they are supplying data that can be accessed, why do people need to do this this check? So it's a good question. I think really what we're looking to do here is just get that sort of light touch piece of assurance by the applicant done before they are granted a license, so that we can be assured at that point that someone's done what they need to do. I think the problem, of course, sharing information and acting upon it is a very important part of what we do, and it will remain so. But that's not really the intention of this approach, and we don't really. Our strategy really is about trying to promote compliance, what we call upstream, which is getting it done at the point when it should be done, and that is so much preferable really to chasing down non-compliance after it's occurred, and so much less disruptive. So that's the aim of this particular intervention, but it doesn't preclude, it's just one element of our overall strategy, and it needs to be looked at in that wider context, I think.
Okay, great, thank you. Paul Timmins, I've not long renewed my license for a 3-year license. Do I have to register for the new system prior to the next renewal? Well, the answer will be yes, won't it? If he's just renewed for 3 years, three years down the line, or 2.5 years down the line, he'll be into the new system.
I think he's referring to prior to, as in within the next year, as opposed to at the point of next renewal.
Right. Well, the answer is register as soon as possible. It's not going to go away, is it?
But you do only have 120 days where the code is valid, so it would be at the point of next renewal.
That's right. When you next renew your license, you'll need to do the tax check.
Got it.
If you should be registered for tax, then don't wait until 3 years to register for tax. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Clyde Masson says, sometimes local authorities can be guilty of using too much jargon, so not communicating as well as they would wish. Is there an opportunity for the trade body reps to provide a set of words to reassure their drivers operators, etc. That local authorities will not be looking at their personal finances, which can be placed on local authority websites, along with all of the information about these checks.
Yeah, we've already been making those announcements on public platforms, on WhatsApp, on Facebook. If you'd like us to draft a document for you, for you to circulate amongst your drivers, reach out. We'll do that for you, no problem.
Okay, Antonia is nodding as well, so that's splendid. Excellent. Okay. Jamie.
We also have our, sorry, just to kind, we also have our fact sheet and other communications resources as well. So I recommend having a look at those. We'll be popping the link in the chat as well.
Okay, Jamil Malik says, what's the purpose of this change in policy? What is the risk we're trying to control? Jamie?
So it's geared towards that segment of the tax gap, and the tax gap is our analysis of the difference between what we collect in tax and what we think we should be theoretically collecting. And it's targeted at that segment of the tax gap, which is the hidden economy, which is basically people who we don't know about in respect of one or more sources of income. So there's further information on our tax gap publication about that, and in total, across the entire economy, our latest estimates of the hidden economy are £3 billion. So it's, you know, it's not an insignificant problem, and it's one that we are keen to work with our partners on to address. So that's kind of the purpose of the policy in a nutshell. But we have also published consultations and things in the past which give a bit more information about, you know, why exactly we're doing this. So I'd recommend perhaps digging those out for a slightly more comprehensive view.
Okay, that's great. Peter Harris says, do my staff also have to have a government gateway number to gain entry, or will it be specific to the council?
You won't need a, sorry, I can do that one. You won't need a government gateway account.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. Right, Simon Cordial, where an elderly driver that is not computer literate wishes to renew his licence, how does he go about this, as he will not have a government gateway account, nor will he have the ability to set one up? Who would like to answer that one?
I can do that.
Yeah, please
Help
do.
to set up an account is available, and help to do the tax check is available. So if you're struggling, get in touch with HMRC, the telephone service is there, contact us. Again, don't leave it too late, contact us, and an advisor will take you through everything. An advisor will have access to the tax check service, will ask you the questions and will input the answers you provide. So help is there.
Okay. Anybody want to add to that? No. Okay. When or how, this is Phil Bailey, when or how soon can drivers and operators begin the process of registering? Jamie.
So I guess it's a question about registering for tax, or you can register for tax pretty much as soon as you begin trading. If the question is about completion of the tax check, that service, you know, will be available for people to complete. And as we've referred to in the presentation, the duration of the tax check will be 120 days. So within that window, you can complete it, you know, any sort of time you want, in line with your plans to make the application for the license renewal.
Okay, super.
Just to, sorry, Jim, just to
yeah.
simplify that, how soon should you register with HMRC to pay tax? As soon as you start working. How soon should you register for conditionality? Within 120 days of your renewal coming up, or your application. So there's two different aspects there, one being HMRC, the other one being this new conditionality clause.
Yep. Okay, that's fine.
Sorry, you actually do get, Dave's absolutely 100% right, you do get a 3-month wiggle room to register. So you don't have to worry about, you know, the first day you sit in the first time you sit in a car, the first time you start receiving income, you've got 3 months to make sure you register. So.
Okay, great, thank you. There's one here from Russell Williams. The gov.gov site says, with guidance for local authorities, You will not be able to grant or refuse a license if you can't confirm the applicant has completed a tax check. Can you point us in the direction of the section of the Act or the SI that states that? Then he carries on to say, I found it. Section 33, paragraphs 2 and 3. Then he says, Jim, thank you very much. Do you envisage any interpretation issues on the wording? Well, the answer is I haven't looked at the wording, so I've no idea, but it's something that we will undoubtedly look at with the taxi working party, the taxi consultative panel for the Institute. So I've made a note of that, Russell, and we'll come back to that. Okay. Right, Sarah Gear, new applicant with one authority, but holds the same type of license with another authority. Would it be a declaration or tax check that would be required with the new applicant authority? It'll be with each application, won't it? Is that right?
Just pausing to see if anyone else wants to come in.
They will need to do a tax check.
Thanks, Cathy.
Because they've already got the same kind of license. It's extant. They're applying to a different licensing authority, but it's the same kind of license. They will need to do a tax check unless they've already done one within the previous 120 days.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. If Martin Owen, I think we've probably answered this. If no code is provided during the application process, as this is a legal requirement, is the application rejected for not providing full details? Yes, I think. If so, I take it there's no avenue to appeal. Is that correct? I think that's correct, yes.
That is correct. The application can't be considered until you as a licensing officer have the tax check code and have done the confirmation before you do anything. Sorry, Cathy, you're going to correct me.
Well, I would add a little nuance to that. The application isn't, I don't think the application is rejected because they can't make a decision on the application. They can't accept it, but they can't refuse it either. It is stuck until such time as the person provides a tax check.
Yep. Okay. Right. Terry Martin, some operators have various trading names. Will each trading name require a tax check code?
So the tax check follows the entity which is applying. So if it's the same legal entity, same company, then the tax check applies to that one company. But obviously, if it's a different company, if it's a subsidiary, then they'll need their own separate tax check because it's a different entity.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Nananka Randall, this is an extra check for the licensing authority, although only a couple of questions. We have over 1,300 drivers, so that's a lot of extra data inputting. Does the local authority need multiple logons for each officer, or is there one for the licensing authority?
So I think Sue mentioned this, but the local authority will not need their own login, so they'll be able to access the portal without any specific login using the data that they've got.
Okay, fantastic. Jeremy Newmark, will HMRC reconsider provision of an API? As an operator that has embraced and invested in technology to help and assist applicants and speed up the employment process during these challenging times, we feel it is retrograde to have an online process without an API that would ease integration into existing systems. This is a standard piece of good practice. So I think that's more of a comment than a question. So can I just pass that on? And then there's an addition to that from Christopher Fieldhouse. We operate a fixed license year, and so we process thousands of renewal applications in around 6 weeks. Having to open a browser, type a code, wait for the refresh, etc., will be a massive burden. An API that can return success or failure and the presumably PDF on success would be a real time saver. So that just adds to that other comment. So I just pass that on to you, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Smith, if the licensing authority refuses a license on the basis the applicant's not registered for taxes, there's still a right of appeal. We've established that no, there isn't. So that's good. Peter Willett, often we have a limited company apply for a private hire operator's license, but are aware that sometimes there are multiple companies behind that company that are not licensed. Is that of any concern to HMRC? So you've got companies holding other companies, I suppose. Anybody want to comment on that?
I think for the purposes of the tax check, the check sort of tracks the entity which makes the application, and that seems like the most proportionate approach. I think maybe some of the issues alluded to might be suitable for kind of separate consideration outside of the core tax check process. If I can leave it at that, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Charlotte Lindop. So we'd refuse or revoke under any other reasonable cause? No, you wouldn't. We've answered that one. Sorry, I should have missed that one out. Okay. If a license is due for renewal in April, this is from Sandra Lewis Williams, but the applicant applies earlier and everything else is in place, would we be able to grant the license before April? Can it be granted, or would we have to wait until April to complete the tax check?
So, do you want me to take this one?
Please, Luke.
So it's based on what determines whether a tax check is needed is based on when the applicant applies. So if the license is due to be renewed on the 6th of April, say, but they apply on the 31st of March, they won't need to do a tax check because they've applied before the legislation takes effect.
Right. Okay.
So they'll be picked up essentially next time they renew in 2 or 3 years' time.
Yeah. Okay. Abuden Eden, I hope I pronounced that properly. What's the plan B in the event checks could not be made due to a technical issue or other circumstances beyond the HMRC portal control?
So probably can refer to the answer that Cathy gave about the safeguard, and that probably answers that question.
Yeah. Here's one from Yvonne Lewis. If the applicant is unable to use the digital platform and uses telephone service, how will the authority obtain the share code? So
the HMRC advisor will give the person on the phone the code. Now, we're exploring whether that can be followed up by a letter, but obviously the person will write it down and then give that to their licensing authority.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the council would still be able to access the platform and verify that that code is correct.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Teresa Bowley, if you issue a 3-year license on the 10th of April 22, will an interim check be required during the 3-year period after the system goes live?
No.
That is no. It's only on renewals, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Andrew Burrows has to leave. Thank you for the information. A bit more on the development of an API from Ross Hill. So just again saying how useful that would be from the local authority point of view. Michael Moss says HMRC have asked the customer how long they have held the license, but the licensing authority do not get the opportunity to confirm that with HMRC as to whether or not that's correct. Isn't this something HMRC would want to know? I suppose the question is, really, why do HMRC want to know how long somebody's held a license for? This is going to apply on all renewals.
It's not a tough one, is it? Let's be honest.
So the reason it's in there is actually set out in the legislation, and the legislation itself quite tightly defines what information can be gathered as part of the tax check. And this part of it is to do with establishing whether or not someone's notified chargeability and reported the income on their tax return. But the other part of it is to do with information that's required to enable us to evaluate the measure. And by evaluate the measure, we mean assess the effectiveness of it as a whole, not in respect of any single applicant or group of applicants. So those particular questions are just to give us a picture of how long people have been operating in the sectors in general to support that evaluation. And therefore, it's not, in our view, needed as part of the information that's disclosed to the licensing body. I hope that helps.
Sorry, Jamie, it's not going to be held as individually identifiable information by HMRC?
Yeah, it'll be held, but the reason we're asking the question is to enable us to, complete that evaluation.
we'll know how long people haven't been registered for, if they're not.
Well, I mean, as I say, the purpose of asking the question is for the evaluation going.
Okay.
I think just to add to that, it's like the commenter sort of suggested that it would be a good idea for local authorities to tell us how long the person's been licensed, but I think we just also need to balance the sort of purpose of the tax check against admin burdens as well, because that will obviously quite be a big admin burden if they're having to input that for every single applicant, and we obviously just need to balance that across.
I think the key point is, though, that regardless of how they answer that question is not going to make any difference as to whether the unique code is generated or not, and it's that code that will be submitted to the council, not the specifications of the answers themselves. So it's not going to make a difference to conditionality. It's just how they answer the questions directly to HMRC.
That's quite correct. That's quite correct. That doesn't affect the license application. I would draw people's attention, of course, to the declaration at the end of it. You're declaring that you're providing honest and accurate information. So, need to be aware when you say yes.
Yep.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not against these things, but I think it's important to be clear with intention. There's nothing wrong with that.
I think the concern within the question is more a case of, is there going to be any further background checks? So if somebody declares to HMRC that they've only just, is a new license, or they've only held a license for 1 year, is that then going to be checked with the local authority, and the local authority come back and say, well, actually, this person's been licensed for 10 years. So are they opening themselves up for fraud?
No one's going to go back to the licensing authority and check that as part of the tax check. As part of the tax check, if you say you've held a license for 8 years, 3 years, 10 years, that's what you're providing, and we'll take that information. We won't be feeding that back to the licensing body or checking on it as part of the tax check.
Okay, but the message is, be honest. Don't try and lie, because it's just not worth it.
Just be honest, because obviously if absolutely out with the tax check and nothing to do with the tax check, but at some point 5, 10, 15 years on, you coincidentally happen to be, subject to a tax inquiry, and you say, oh, I was only licensed for 10 years, and actually you were licensed for 20 years. Well, you've made a declaration. But the purposes of the tax check, this has nothing to do. As Jamie says, it's absolutely for evaluation of the policy.
Yeah, and I think it is worth just being, clear on that point. So the intention of gathering that information is for the reasons I set out, but people do need to be aware that when they're giving this information, they are giving it to HMRC, and they will need to declare that the information is accurate. So, as with all information provided, to HMRC, it would be available for those purposes.
I mean, that's the point I'm making. It's going to be a matter of concern, but it's, that's the fair playing field. That's what we've got to do.
Okay, great. And then Michael's got a further one, which I think is quite good, actually. Can HMRC provide licensing authorities with screenshots of the dummy screens, which the licensing authorities will see and use? So this can be shared with customers to demonstrate what information the licensing authority will see or not see in order to be open and transparent.
An excellent suggestion.
When you say share the dummy screens, because as part of the presentation, we've shared the screens.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
We've already agreed that the presentation can be shared on the platform. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. That's super.
It's a really good book. Michael, we will be sharing those dummy screens.
Sorry, Gary, I missed that.
No, sorry, Sue, I didn't mean to talk over Sue. Go on.
No, I was just going to say a quick caveat. It's a prototype. We've still got lots of months of testing before it goes live. So words might change, but the nature of the screens won't.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this is one of the things HMRC have been really good about. It is we're going to be sharing those screenshots like this, tomorrow, both in the trade press and everything else, so that people can be clear about it. And as you say, basically they're going to be the same. So, and I think this is part of the overall education. HMRC can only do so much in terms of getting the message out. The ball is in our court now within the trade to make sure that it's pushed out. So, the presentation was excellent, and we will be pushing it hard. I know that.
Good. Okay. Nadeem Ahmed says, I like it as it's a very simple process. And I also like the fact that it will find the hidden, as Gary said. But is it possible, as he's speaking as a taxi driver, to work taxis and hide from HMRC? By the way, I'm fully disclosed to HMRC, he says.
I think
I suppose he's asking you to comment on the existence of the black economy. So good luck with that one, ladies and gentlemen.
I think the simple answer to that one is no, it's not. That's the whole point of this conditionality, so that everybody that is applying for a license is visible to HMRC and are verified to licensing authority that they're visible to HMRC. And if they're not going to get a license. It's as simple as that.
Yep. Right. For first-time applicants, will licensing authorities need to record the applicant's declaration that they've read and or understood HMRC guidance on their tax registration obligations? And is there any retention are there any retention guidelines for this? So
we suggest that you keep that declaration for as long as you keep the rest of the licensing information and application that's been provided.
Yep, absolutely.
So basically in line with current retention policies.
Yeah. Katie Thorpe says, is this only in place for the renewal application submitted from the 4th of April and beyond?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, hang on. We just shot to the bottom again. Just a second. Lisa Vaughan says, is this a one-time check at renewal after the 4th of April, or will the check take place at each renewal thereafter? It's each renewal thereafter, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Carly Temple, can I just confirm the tax check is both for employed and self-employed, for employees and self-employed? Is that correct?
Yeah, that was one of the questions that I raised with HMRC right at the start. And it is that you are registered, whether that be on a self-employed basis or as a pay-as-you-earn basis, you are registered with HMRC. So, yeah.
Okay. Barry Monker says, instead of applicants having to go through this process for every application, why do the licensing authority not just share details of all license holders with HMRC on an annual basis, similar to what they have to do with the Cabinet Office for the National Fraud Initiative?
I think we answered that question earlier with the data sharing.
Yeah,
didn't we?
I think you did, to be honest. Yes. Okay. Right. Charlotte Lindop. So if they have an existing license that's still valid and then they submit a renewal, but they haven't proved they're registered for tax, we would have to reject the application as incomplete rather than refuse to renew. If we refuse to renew, they'd be able to continue to work until the appeals have been disposed of. Yes, I think we've dealt with that. Sorry, okay. Right, that's in relation to extending it, so we'll miss that one out. Would it be deemed, Clyde Masson says, would it be deemed reasonable to issue a license for a lesser period than 3 years if a check couldn't be completed due to either HMRC or the licensing authority systems being down for any period as mentioned? No, because you just can't grant the license, can you? Right, we'll go, this thing keeps shooting to the bottom again. Right, Graham Lang says, with drivers being able to renew online, could the Gov UK portal be updated to request the tax code at that point if they have it? If they don't, they can be directed to guidance with the online renewal still allowed to be submitted. If they have it, licensing authorities can do the check immediately. So this is back to integrating the gov.uk and the licensing authorities systems, isn't it, I think?
Not entirely sure. I think what they're referring to there is a similar thing to the DBS update service, so that once you've got that code, it remains valid for the period, as opposed to having to apply for a new code every renewal. I think that's what he's asking.
Oh, right. Okay.
I'll come in there. Cathy might also want to come in there too.
Please.
But basically, the tax check, oh, Luke has appeared. The tax check refers to a specific tax year. So that's why we need to ensure that the tax check is done at every renewal, because that might change. It relates to the most recent tax year. So, you know, if people register and then deregister and keep the tax check code, that's not going to work. It has to relate to the most recent tax year.
Okay, right.
Makes sense.
Deborah, will there be any other language formats for any of the information we can circulate? We have a number of different ethnicities in our area where information in other formats can be useful. And she went on to say, I appreciate there's an understanding of English, that understanding English is a requirement. It's certainly for taxi licensees, but such things as this in written form can be useful.
Thanks, that's a helpful comment. So I think we're aware of some of the language barriers that some in the sector may face. We won't be making the service itself available in other languages, but we have produced a fact sheet, and we are looking to make that available in a small number of other languages for those who might need it, and that will just help people to understand the core requirements and what they need to do. I understand it's five other languages for the fact sheet that we're looking to translate.
Okay, excellent. Sally Garcia, for the telephone calls where drivers are not able to set up a gateway service themselves and require help, what happens if the phones are really busy and drivers are not able to get through in time to renew if they leave it late? And then she goes on to say, we won't know if they haven't been able to get through on the phones for 5 days, for example.
No, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know someone's tried to ring us and hasn't been able to get through. And I think you have to bear in mind that, you know, there are peak periods and there are busy periods, and you need to factor that in. And I think, you know, it was a fair message that was given before. Don't leave it till the last minute.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just as a follow-up to that, is it going to be an automated line? Is it going to be a 24-hour line, or is it manned?
So it's
sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's manned, and people will be ringing the usual helpline for HMRC for their whoever they are. So if they're a company or an individual, it'll be the usual line.
Okay, so I think it's important then that we get the message out there within our communications, what the timeframes are that they can ring on.
Yep, that was
agreed. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Graham Lang says, can a tax check code be submitted without a renewal application? For example, the driver sends in the tax code 10 weeks before the application and sends in the renewal application 6 weeks before the expiry. Why would they do that? I'm not quite sure what the purpose of spending 2 times contacting the authority is, but anyway.
To be fair, Jim, it may well be to make sure that they've got the code and they satisfy the conditionality in plenty of time, and then they submit their application within the required time frame of the application renewal. So it could.
And that makes sense.
Does actually make sense.
Yeah,
it does make sense. You might want to get it out of the way and do it early, just like, oh, you know, I want to be sure this works and all of that. You just need to bear in mind that it's only valid for 120 days. So don't do it too early because you'd have to redo it.
Yeah. Okay. Charlotte Lindop makes a comment. There are going to be a lot of applications in limbo. Michael Moore says, as this relates, no, that won't apply, Michael, because it doesn't apply to vehicles. Sorry, missed that. Right. Okay. For applicants for licenses, for new applicants for licenses, says Debbie Devine, who have to confirm they understand the requirements, can this be a simple tick box on an application to say they do?
We've suggested a form of words the licensing body can add to the application. So it's a declaration.
Yep, that's super. Okay.
But they'll still have to supply the code anyway, won't they?
Not for first-time applicants.
All right, thanks.
First-time applicants don't do the tax check.
Right, Graham Lang. probably highly unlikely, but if the system is down for days 1 to 4 and comes live on day 5, this could mean that the licensing authority has a 4-day backlog with many drivers then accessing the system for a tax code and sending in tax codes to licensing authorities, causing backlogs, well, it's disappeared halfway through me reading it, in issuing. Is 5 consecutive offline days not too much? You can't win, can you?
5 consecutive offline days, you know, and you just think, oh, crikey, I don't want to tempt Providence. It is extremely unlikely that it even goes down for 24. It's not happened. That's not to say it mightn't, but you know, you have to draw the line at some point, basically.
Yeah.
I would also say that we consulted. We consulted on this. We spoke with representatives of the sectors and of licensing bodies as we were developing the legislation. So we had informal conversations with them, and we asked, does 5 days seem about right? Should it be more? Should it be less? Nobody expressed any discontent with that. We consulted on the legislation as a whole last summer, so you know, we've gone with a period that seems reasonable to us, and nobody came back and said and disagreed. But there is the potential to amend it if it turns out to be either too short or too long. But at the moment, it's a period that people were content with.
Okay, that's great. Charlotte Lindop says local authorities are going to get lots of questions from drivers asking how long they've been licensed. It was bands, wasn't it, if I remember rightly from your slide? So it is,
yeah, it is bands, Jim, and we're not looking for exact, you know roughly whether it's been 10 years or 5 or 20. So it is within bands.
Yeah.
Makes it a bit easier.
Yeah, that's fine. James Astin says, if a driver intentionally decides not to renew their license and allows it to expire, and then makes a new application with the intention of remaining hidden from HMRC, will a tax check code be required?
Yes, it will, unless he leaves the period when he's got no license at all to a full year. So,
Right.
So if he lets his license expire, does nothing for a full year, and then decides to apply for a new license, then he would be a first-time applicant. But otherwise, he's going to have to do a tax check. So it depends how long he's content not to operate his business for.
Sure. Steve, you got your hand up. Sorry, I didn't notice that. And
from the previous one, James, it was just, I can't remember what was on the slides that we went through, even though I've seen them a few times. We had them at our roadshow. Would the word approximately be helpful when you're asking for the duration of license, or is it there already?
Good point, and I'd have to go back and look at that slide. But I take the feedback. Anything on how the questions are phrased, and I say we do test them. But yeah, I'm quite happy to take that feedback if it's not there already.
It may just stop that fear of licensing authorities getting asked a lot of questions about durations of licensing.
Yeah.
Just that one word approximately.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just to come in on the response to James's question, whether a driver intentionally let his badge expire for a year. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It would mean that he'd be treated as a new applicant, which would mean having to do a complete new medical, a complete new driving test, a complete new DBS, everything that is involved as a new applicant. So I can't see any drivers taking that risk because it costs them far too much.
Well, it's interesting because if somebody's got a 5, 10, 15-year history of not declaring, it wouldn't be that, it would be as expensive as having to renew. And because conditionality only counts within private hire, they could possibly go and be delivering food or parcels for you and come back again. You know, I'm kind of creating a story, but there is an actionable and potential gap in the system where drivers could go off and do other things that aren't subject to conditionality and then come back again. And if you talk about 5, 10, 15, 20, I mean, I think the best failure to notify I've ever dealt with is 27 years. I haven't repeated that many times, but you know, potentially there's a gap there, I think.
Okay, right. Moving on to I've lost it. Ellie King. What's the rationale behind the need to complete the tax check being based on the date when the renewal is submitted and not the date of renewal of the license? This is in reference to the introduction. Jamie.
I must admit, I don't know the answer to that question. So I'll just pause if colleagues maybe be able to get a bit better answer than me. I suspect it was something that we were asked to do during the consultation as the most appropriate date to kind of track from.
Anybody else? Anything to say on that one? Nope. Okay.
I'm going to confess that I can't remember. We looked at options for when the start date should be, and came down on the date when the application is actually received. I'm really sorry, I can't remember.
Okay, that's fine.
I think coming in on that, the date that you submit your application is the date that the application is deemed to have been complete or incomplete. So if you're applying for your license, you may apply for your license 4 weeks before your vehicle or your, sorry, not vehicle because it's not counted yet, your current license is due to expire. So if you were to do it from the date of issue as opposed to the date of application, then you kind of cross over between whether you actually needed the code or not.
Yeah. And there's a follow-up to that. Graham Barker says, will we, I assume local authorities, be inundated in February and March? Maybe, I don't know. Right, Charlotte Lindop says, can an extra option be added to the tax check for new applicants so they get a code or something to share with the local authorities to show they've been on and read the documents, rather than relying on the local authority application forms to hold the data? Well, the local authority holds the application forms anyway, so adding an extra line to that I don't think is a particularly onerous burden. I'm not sure that's a particular problem, but anybody got any comments on that?
Well, is it not?
New applicants aren't doing tax checks.
No. So to show they're aware of the fact that they have to be aware of the need to pay tax, I suppose, is the answer.
And that's far quicker than doing a tax check. You're being given the link to HMRC guidance on your tax obligations. You read it and then you confirm that you have read it. Is a much shorter process and particularly less burdensome for both applicant and licensing body.
Yeah, I was going to say I can't see what stage of the process it would cut out unless but I'm very happy to take any further feedback on that point.
Okay. Nikki Riddle, if a new driver has signed a declaration that they will register, do we still need to do the check when they renew 3 years later? Yes. Yes. Okay, that's good. Various thank yous. Right. John Clucas, what if the applicant uses slightly different details on the gov.uk declaration compared with the application for renewal to the LA? We do have people who sometimes use middle names, sometimes other times don't. If this happens, would the check done by the licensing authority not bring back an authentic, would it not match, in other words?
I'm happy to take this one.
Yeah, Luke, please.
Yeah, with the system that licensing bodies and that will be using to get verification of the code, we've specifically avoided names for that specific reason. So the pieces of identifying information should be fairly unique and not too difficult to get wrong. Does that make sense? So things like date of birth and stuff like that. So you probably saw, if you look back at the presentation and have a look at the screens, you'll see that we specifically decided to try and avoid those specific issues.
Yeah. Okay. Sandra Lewis Williams says, when will the tax check portal only go live in April? I suspect she means, why will the tax check portal only go live in April? Beginning of the tax year?
The tax check service itself, the digital service, goes live in April because, so actually the tax check service will go live. People will be able to access it in March. And that's because we're aware, so I think from the 7th of March, because we're aware that people who need to renew on or very shortly after the 4th of April will need to have done their tax check code to be able to put it on the application form and send it in. But licensing bodies, the portal for licensing bodies, the confirmation service is from the 4th of April because that's when the legislation comes into effect.
Yeah, okay. Angelina Dawson, what's the rationale for first-time applicants not having to do this?
So it relates to the requirement to register for income tax self-assessment, which can be sometime after the commencement of trading. So during the consultation, we were looking at ways to kind of minimise burdens and ensure that the tax check didn't provide a kind of a barrier to entry into the sectors, bearing in mind that people can be trading before, for a little while before they need to notify chargeability for income tax in particular. The decision was made to exempt the initial applications from the need to do the tax check. So it's a bit of a safeguard, and it's there to ensure any burdens associated with the tax check are minimised as far as possible.
Okay. Kate Roberts says, will there be any new burdens payments to local authorities? And if there are, which will be the government department administering it?
We're just working through that actually at the moment. We are intending to make some payments to local authorities to reflect the changes that are coming in. As I say, as sort of mentioned earlier, we think the changes required are relatively modest. The small administrative changes to the forms and systems, but nonetheless, we are looking to do that. We should be able to confirm some further details about which department and how soon.
Okay. Phil Wake says, if a person phones in for a code, can HMRC email the local authority with their details and the code? It would save on mistakes. I suspect the answer is no, because you won't necessarily know which local authority they're going to apply to.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think we're looking at the option to
No.
disclose through email. It has to be done through the service. Yeah, it's more secure that way.
And if you're going to send them a letter, that's fine. They can bring the letter in, can't they? Okay. Katie Thorpe, for new applicants who previously held the same license with another local authority, but that has since expired, is it correct they do not need to provide a tax check code?
It depends how long ago the previous license expired. We're back to that 1 year rule.
Yep. Okay. Right. Christopher Fieldhouse just wants it confirmed that it doesn't apply to proprietors, vehicle proprietors. So we can all confirm that. Right. Sophia Thomas, if an applicant has provided their code check and the check is completed, can this information be used as a check for their right to work? I think the answer is no. Yes, you're all shaking your heads. Excellent.
No, it's a no. Yeah, it's a separate system to the right to work checks. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Harry Griffiths, in regard to a scrap dealer's site license, would all persons on the application need to provide a tax share code, such as the director, shadow director, secretary, site manager, etc.?
So it's only the tax check code will follow the entity that's applying for the license. So it sounds like that's a company, so it'd be one code for that one company.
Yep, that's what I was thinking. Okay.
Comes in that if you have one company with more than one site, that could be an issue if that's those sites are in different local authorities. So I think that's one little thing that probably needs to be ironed out a little bit, but I think it will be fairly simple to do.
It would be a tax check for each application, wouldn't it? It'd be the same company, each application, and if the applications are more than 120 days apart, they'd need to do a fresh one.
The issue you have is the same company would have to log on to the gateway for different license applications. So if they've got one in, I don't know, Barking and one in Reading, then that company is the entity, but they've got different sites. And those licenses are not linked to the head office potentially in Canary Wharf. They're linked to Reading and Barking. So there's that little issue about who and how it applies if that corporate entity has one gateway. Surely
they just use the number twice.
But it's about getting that number from the corporate to the depot manager who will probably be doing the license application.
Right, that's an internal matter, isn't it?
Yes, to a degree, because some companies will have the license attached to the depot manager. So it's a little bit more complex, but I think one or two will soon questions will iron that issue out.
Okay, a comment there. And the final one is, can you give any indications which other sectors might be next? No, we can't. We've said that. Thank you. Yeah, just thanks coming in now. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have answered 130 questions, which knocks University Challenge into a cocked hat, I think. So lots of thank yous coming in, and it's now just down to me. It's time to wind it up. Thank you very much indeed. I sincerely hope that everybody who joined is leaving with more information and more knowledge and more understanding than they had when they arrived. And if that's the case, then it's been a great success. I'd like to thank all the panelists for giving their time and also their enthusiasm and being so open and contributing so well to this. So thank you to Sue Riley, Jamie Horton, Cathy Smith, Luke Jones, David Lawrie, Steve Wright, Antonia Gray, and Gary Jacobs. I'd also like to thank Sue Nelson for all her help in dealing with all the technical issues. And we will be putting these links on the Institute website so that the access to the recording can be made. And the final thing really to say is that if you've got any further questions about this as a licensee, then contact either HMRC or your own accountant or tax advisor. The local authority is not going to have any more information than has been provided. There are the fact sheets. It's actually, I think, to be fair, and I'm not always complimentary to things that appear on gov.uk, I think that these fact sheets and this information is very good. It's clear, it's simple, it explains the issues, and really, I think that's it. So without further pontification on my part, thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thank you, everybody who attended. I do hope that you have found it useful. And to everybody, presenters and attendees, I hope you have a very, very pleasant and tax worrying free weekend. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.
Can I also just say that I hope that those attending have left this meeting feeling reassured that this isn't a target. This is purely and simply a step to make everybody happy and everybody fair.
Great. Okay.